Ciao Minecraft fans, which is Italian for hello. Welcome to another modded Minecraft tutorial. In this video, I'll show you how to set up a very basic Applied Energistics matter energy system that runs off almost no power. This is going to allow you to get into AE's Emmy storage fairly early game, and it'll provide everything you need to automate expanding your system even more. So if we need to start off with some basic components. What we are going to need is we're going to need some nether quartz and some Certus quartz. And Certus quartz you get in the overworld, nether quartz you obviously get in the nether. And when you mine Certus quartz, sometimes you will get Certus quartz dust. When you mine nether quartz, you don't get nether quartz dust. So we need to find a way to turn some of that into dust. And you can use Applied Energistics grindstone, which you hand crank this knob, and you can turn nether quartz into nether quartz dust. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. You can also turn Certus quartz into Certus quartz dust. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. If you have some machinery set up, you can also use Thermal Expansion's pulverizer. You can also use IC2's macerator. And then the next component we're going to need is we're going to need some silicon. And what you do is you take your dust, you can either use the nether or the Certus quartz dust, and you cook it using any type of furnace, and it'll turn into silicone. And then we need a bunch of these chipsets. And there's two ways to do the chipsets. One is you can make this tool, this quartz cutting knife, and this is the recipe. It's just sticks and one piece of iron and then Certus quartz and nether quartz. And that will make you this cutting knife. If you use the cutting knife, you can use it in this pattern with gold in the middle to make a basic processor assembly, and then you'll have to cook that in a furnace and it will give you a basic processor. If you have some infrastructure set up, you can also use an assembly table and just put one gold, one redstone, and one silicon in there, and you'll get a basic processor. The advanced processor is pretty much the same, except you need a diamond. And you can also make the basic one and cook it, or you can do that in an assembly table with just silicon, redstone, and diamond. And then once you have these processors in place, we need to get a basic Emmy controller. So one of the other things we need to craft is this Fluix crystal, which is one of each type of quartz and then some redstone. And then finally you'll have enough stuff to make an Emmy controller. And this is the Emmy controller. You will need one of these advanced processors. And then once you have your Emmy controller, you can hook it up to power. And I have a couple of Emmy controllers just hooked up to a couple things, because one of the things that we want to do is we want to start out on a budget here. So we're going to take a look at the controller. Now this controller, the way Emmy works is it draws continuous power. So it will draw 1.2 MJs a tick with nothing attached. If we just use a storage bus, it's only 1.4 MJs a tick. And we can just use a storage bus on any type of chest we have. The other option you can do is you can build the Emmy storage chest, and then you have to build one of these storage cells. That takes a little bit more. It takes 1.8 MJs. This only takes 1.4. You can also take a drive bay, which empty uses 1.6 MJs, but if we fill it up, we're up to 5 MJs a tick to fill this thing up. And if we're starting out early, we may not have that much power left over. And then there's some other things that we can hook up. Here's an export bus, and this will spit items out into something like a chest or whatever. That uses a little bit more MJ. Here's a basic Emmy interface, which we're going to use to hook up to our machines. It uses almost no power. It's 1.2 I believe without, and 1.4 with. Yeah, 1.2, so it only uses 0.2 MJs. And then here's an import bus. And typically you would use an import bus, like you can attach one to each machine. But if we look at this, it uses 1.6 MJs instead of 1.2. So it uses 0.4 MJs for every one of these import buses. And we're going to set this up on a budget, so this is important stuff for us. And then we need a molecular assembly chamber, which I'll cover in a second, but I just wanted to show you that the molecular assembly chamber also uses almost no MJs. What's that, 0.2? Because it's 1.2 without. Let's take a look. Yeah, 1.2, and then 1.4 MJs for a molecular assembly chamber. This is the smallest one we can build. And we're going to build this system right here. We're going to take an Emmy controller and a crafting terminal, and then a crafting monitor, and the smallest molecular assembly chamber we can make, and we're just going to attach it to a chest, a diamond chest from the iron chest mod, using a storage bus. And this is how we set that up. So what we need to do is we need some of this Fluix crystal stuff, Fluix dust, and this is how it's made. And then we need some Emmy cables, which we use our Fluix dust with some glass, and we get Emmy cables. And then you're also going to need one of these conversion matrices, and this is how you set it up, and this is that gold processor that we looked at over there. And then once you have the conversion matrix, you can make the first utility you need, which is an Emmy interface. And that uses that with a little bit of glass and iron and one of your cables. And what we want to do with our first Emmy interface is turn it into one of these import buses that we can use, or storage buses that we can use for our chest. And you do that with another cable and then a little bit of iron. And then we want to build this molecular assembly chamber because we want to set up an early game, a fairly early game AE system, and we want it to start crafting stuff for us because there's a lot of stuff to combine. We don't want to do all this by hand. We want machines to do it for us. So to build this molecular assembly chamber, you're going to need these containment walls, and this is how you build it. It's iron and gold and then Certus quartz. And then you need some of these heat vents, and this is iron bars and then iron ingots and then another Emmy cable. And then we need this other thing in here. So we need to build a storage cell, another one of these gold processors, some Certus quartz, some redstone. And the storage cell with the conversion matrices we made down there will get us a pattern provider. And that's what's at the center of this molecular assembly chamber that lets us put patterns in here. And then the last thing we're going to need is we're going to need to make the pattern. So we use this pattern encoder, which is just a crafting table, some iron, and then one of those conversion matrices. And then we need to make a bunch of these blank patterns, which is some glowstone, some glass, Certus quartz, and iron. So that's what we need to set up to get basic system going. And this is our basic system that we're going to set up. It's really small, but this will get you started. And once you set this up and power it up, look at this. I'm using 2 MJs a tick for this basic system. And these are all the ingredients we need to make it. So I'm just going to grab all this stuff. We're going to set it up. Now to make the smallest molecular assembly chamber possible, we need 20 containment walls, 6 heat vents, and then we need something in the middle, which is the pattern provider. Where did that go? We need a pattern provider. I got one in this chest over here somewhere. One pattern provider, which is this recipe right there. You can put crafting CPUs in here, but we're going to make the smallest one, so we just want the pattern provider. It's going to be a little slow, but again, this is 2 MJs a tick. All of this stuff over here along this wall is hooked up to a creative energy cell for testing purposes. We have one dynamo from Thermal Expansion, and it's going to put out 80 RF a tick. And that'll be enough to power our system. So we're going to start out building our molecular assembly chamber. It's a 9 block structure, 3 by 3. And this has to work. You have to create some sort of cube-like structure. And all of the corners have to be made of the Emmy containment walls. And then in the middle spots that are not corners, you have to put these heat vents. So we put a heat vent on the bottom, one in each of these 4 corners. We round it out with some more of the containment walls. In the center, we put crafting CPUs and pattern providers. Again, we're building the smallest one, so just a pattern provider. And then we're going to need a heat vent on top of that, and the rest of this is containment walls. And typically I like to build this underground and just hide this stuff below. But just for an example here, we're building this above ground. And then we need to get power into this system. We need to get it started up. So we use our Emmy controller. The Emmy controller is the only part of the Emmy system that has to be attached to power. So here's the redstone energy conduit attached to our magma crucible, and we're just going to stick the controller right there, and now it's getting power. A whole 1.4 MJs a tick. No power at all. And then we're going to need a crafting terminal and a crafting monitor. The crafting terminal is made with an access terminal and one of these storage cells, and the access terminal is one of those conversion matrices and some glass and iron. So it's not too hard to set up. I usually skip the access terminal because you can use just the access terminal, but I like to start off with the crafting terminal because the reason why I'm setting up one of these is to start doing crafting. And then we also need a crafting monitor, which is one of these gold chipsets and a little bit of iron and stuff like that. And it goes right there because we want to see if we mess something up. And then the last two things we need is we need this pattern encoder, and it does not have to be attached to the Emmy system, and it's just going to go right there for now. Just a little pause to get organized. Now that we have our pattern encoder, the last thing we need is one of these blank patterns, which again is this recipe with the glowstone and stuff. And I already have some ingredients in here. We made some stuff up. Now we're going to teach Emmy to do the rest of the stuff for us. So the first thing we need is we need more of these blank patterns. So I'm going to hit R for recipe, shift click the question mark, and we're going to tell Emmy how to make more blank patterns. And then this pattern goes in our molecular assembly chamber. And now in addition to all the things I have in this chest, it says I can craft some blank patterns. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. And this should go at a decent clip. There we go. And then we're going to teach it to make the stuff we need to connect the machines up. So we need one of these Emmy interfaces. So let's encode a pattern for that. And that's going to need Emmy cables. We'll encode a pattern for that. And the Emmy cables need Fluix dust. We'll encode a pattern for that. And then the other thing that we needed with this Emmy interface is this conversion matrix. So we'll go ahead and encode a pattern for that. So Emmy interface, all of this stuff. The last thing we needed was these basic processors. And what I'm going to do is we're going to set up a thermal thermal expansion redstone furnace. And I'm going to teach it that you take one of these basic processor assemblies, which I already made a few of, and you cook it, and you'll get this basic processor that we need. And I already have one in the system just to help us out. There we go. And then we're going to set this up. So I should have everything in here now to make the Emmy interface. And you can see it'll chug along, do its stuff. It's making the flux crystals. It's making everything it needs. And then it's done. So now I have a basic Emmy interface. And we're going to attach this to a redstone furnace. And we're just going to pop this down right here. And it's getting power, again, from our one dynamo, which will provide enough power to power up the system and power this redstone furnace. And then we're going to teach Emmy how to craft with this redstone furnace. So we're going to put an Emmy interface in here. And what we need to do with this Emmy interface is we need to point it at the redstone furnace. And I have an in-bar battle wrench in my hand. But you can actually use any wrench you want. This is a quartz wrench from Applied Energistics, which you make with either nether quartz or Certus quartz in any combination. You can also use Engineer's Toolbox, Ender IO, Enhanced Portals, Buildcraft, the basic crescent hammer. You can even use a forcer wrench. Pretty much any wrench you can get your hands on is going to work for this. So we take our wrench and we flip this thing around. We want this arrow to point at our redstone furnace. And then we need to program the redstone furnace. So we're going to turn off this redstone control because I don't want it to accidentally shut off. And it's already set up the input from the side. Let's make it output on the top. And then we already made a pattern to take the basic processor and stick it in this machine and cook it. So we have some of these basic processors. Let's go ahead and tell it to make one of these cooked ones. And it sticks it in the redstone furnace. But nothing happened. So we need to get this processor out of the furnace and back into the Emmy system. And you can do this in several ways, but I'm going to show you how to do this with the item ducts. So we can actually point the item duct, just pretend this doesn't exist. We can point the item duct back at the Emmy interface. And we can tell you to output. And look, it goes into the Emmy interface. And now it's in our Emmy system. It shows up here. So now I taught it how to cook these things up. And one last pause for organization. So now we have our basic system. We taught it how to craft stuff, we taught it how to use machines, and now we're going to teach it everything, because we have to teach it everything. So I have to teach it how to turn logs into planks, and then I'll have to teach it how to turn like planks into crafting tables, and pretty much everything. And we're going to get carried away. We're going to make a bunch of these patterns. We're going to fill this molecular assembly chamber up really fast. But before you do that, the last thing you want to do is we're going to have to expand this molecular assembly chamber, and you can expand it on any side that you want. Usually what I'll do is I'll stick this underground, and then you can just expand it down, and I'll stick it in the corner of something so I can expand on a couple sides, and then we can go either way. But we're going to have to expand this molecular assembly chamber soon, because we're going to fill this up. So before we fill it up, we want to teach it how to make all the stuff to make the bigger molecular assembly chamber. So these are the containment walls, and we'll encode that recipe. This is the heat vents, and we'll encode that recipe. And then this is the pattern provider that we use, and we'll encode that recipe, and that has the crafting table, which we already taught it how to make. And then we just stick these in our Emmy interface, and they're good to go. So now, before we fill this up entirely, the last thing that we have is we have the patterns to make a bigger molecular assembly chamber. And you can actually automatically feed stuff into here with a hopper. So make me another one of these. Let's teach it how to make a hopper. And then I can stick this pattern into our hopper. It goes into the molecular assembly chamber. In fact, you can stick the pattern provider above a hopper, which works really well if you have this molecular assembly chamber below ground. And every time you encode a pattern, it will automatically go into your Emmy molecular assembly chamber. And there we go. We pretty much covered all the basics. I do have to teach it to make a chest out of oak wood, because NEI will give me different types of wood. And I have oak wood, and then that can go in here, and I went ahead and supplied some oak wood into the system here. You'll have to manually feed this stuff in here until you get machines set up to import into everything else. And again, we're doing this on a budget, so we have very little power right now, and you can set up one of these precision import buses and draw a lot of power, or I can continue to use item ducts and pump everything into one of these Emmy interfaces. So I could put a chest right above here. Let's take a chest. And boom. Now, whenever I put stuff in this chest, this particular one needs a pneumatic servo because the Redstone Furnace automatically ejects items. The chest doesn't. And now items come out of the chest and they go into the Emmy system. So all that stuff I put in there is going into the Emmy system. It shows up in here. This is a really easy way to do this. You can obviously use ducts that have faster movement than this, and you won't need one of these import buses to tie up more Emmy energy that you're using. And you can power this off of, we powered it off of redstone flux being converted into MJs. You can also power it off of IndustrialCraft EU, Universal Electricity, Rotorcraft Watts, and AE I don't think has a base storage unit, but this is what we got going on. So there's how you set up a simple Applied Energistics system. This is enough to get you going to build a bigger Applied Energistics system. To build more patterns, you can teach it how to make these drive bays and then get rid of the chests altogether. And we can do cheaty things like pump items into one of these Emmy interfaces, and that's going to prevent us from drawing more power from the system, because this Applied Energistics system is always going to need a continuous supply of power. But right now, our system is so small that we have one big magnetic dynamo that easily feeds the whole system. So there we go. That's basic, simple Applied Energistics. And if you set up some of the more advanced machines, I actually have a separate tutorial So that you can set up the magma crucible and the fluid transposer, and you can teach these to fill up like a redstone energy cell, or these item ducts that you have to fill up. Not those ones. The impulse item duct, you have to fill it up with energized glowstone, and there's a separate tutorial that I have that teaches you how to automate these machines with Applied Energistics, and also teaches you how to do it with logistics pipes. But we're done for now, so thanks everybody for watching, thanks everybody who likes and subscribes, and I hope you find this useful and find out how easy it is to get into Applied Energistics using almost no power and setting up a basic system that is just enough that you can automate building a bigger system. Thanks everyone.